Okay, I'm guessing I'm alive. Well, I know I'm alive, but the picture I see on the screen indicates I'm not, so we'll see what happens. Hopefully, even if you can't see me, you can listen, but let's go on with that. Um, I'm looking at the issue of questions. I'm still sort of playing off the assignment checklist I started talking about last week, and I'm looking at the section today on questions. In my experience over the years that I've been teaching, um, people don't ask enough questions. They don't ask all the right questions either. One of the things I'm going to suggest, and I'll explain this more as I get into here, or why perhaps, maybe hopefully you'll see why I'm thinking about that, is that you might want to get a notebook. Well, this sort of depends on how you best work. You could get a notebook that you just keep, just if you've got, say, like a loose leaf book or something that you add pages in, you might want just a few sections or a few pages in a section that's just for questions, but some place to keep your questions together. If you're in school and you're taking multiple classes, you might actually even want to consider having a space for questions for each particular topic. So I know that this may seem a little strange, but if you think about it from one standpoint, if you're like a lot of people, when you write questions, you might write questions wherever you happen to be on a page at that particular moment in time. So let's just say on the beginning of September, you were in a class and you wrote a question down at your notes at that point. Now you're a couple of classes later and you've got another question, but you're trying to go back to what question you had 2 weeks ago, and it's like, where is it? Unless you go back and redo your notes or revisit your notes frequently, you may not actually see it. But if you keep everything together, you have your questions there. You can even set it up so that you write your questions down, and when you get your answers, you can go back and answer the question, and it's all right there. So in other words, you don't have to keep looking for those things, right? Does that make sense? So when I'm thinking in terms of questions, let's talk about assignments. And this could be any assignment, whether it's a school assignment or not. And you're thinking in terms that you get whatever you're supposed to do. You've got that task. Start jotting down all sorts of questions and asking if it's a face-to-face situation, get all the answers you can and writing them down on that particular sheet of paper if the questions, whatever it is. Okay? As you get other questions, add them later so that you can go back and next time you see the instructor or your boss or whomever, you can get the questions later. If you're not in the class or you're thinking about something later, go back and think about this particular assignment. Ask a lot of questions, whatever comes to mind. You want to ask things like, what's the particular format? Is there going to be a word limit? Do I need to have pictures? Do I need to have a particular font? What's the topic going to be? What's the connection going to be? You're looking for whatever it is that you're going to need to particularly do this assignment, right? Now, you're going to say that some of this doesn't matter. The thing about this is a couple of things. A, it gets it into your head and you start thinking about it, even if you don't necessarily think about it at that moment in time. Now, if you remember, or maybe you didn't because you weren't here at that time, I did a post some few months ago, weeks, whatever. I don't remember how long ago it was. But one of the comments I made is that when you stick something into your brain, ask it a question and go on about something and do something else. Sooner or later, you'll get the answer to it. Now, this is kind of like what you mostly experience when you're maybe in the shower or you're doing something and suddenly you've got the answer to a question that you had been asking, but you didn't know where it was, and it just like it was there. This is the kind of thing that your brain does. You ask it a specific question, it will do whatever it does in your head, and then somewhere along the line, the answer will pop out at you. So let's think in terms of you've got a paper to do and you're trying to figure out what am I going to do, even if it's the questions to along the line of how does this class fit in with anything else I'm doing? What is the paper topic? What am I going to do with this? I don't know. How do I handle this? Even if your questions are something around the idea of what am I going to do with this particular topic, if you put it in words that you write down that make sense, so it's make a good valid question and just sort of say, write it down on that paper, keep it, and every once in a while, go back and look at your questions, including that one. What's going to happen most likely, and again, over the course of time, you might have to train your brain to do this, or not so much train your brain as become aware of when it's happening, is if you're thinking in terms of, say, how does this subject connect with anything I do in my life? And if you think about that every once in a while, you will start seeing or becoming aware of little issues that, in a sense, answer that question. So you're going to start finding these little useful tidbits, if you will, that you can use for that particular paper or that particular assignment. Because what you've done is you've triggered your brain to become aware of those issues. And so you're going to start looking for them when you see them. Does that make sense? On a kind of sort of related, but not quite, it's related in my head, but you become aware of something when you stick it into your head. For example, it's like when you buy the car and you drive off the lot and suddenly you see it all over the place. If you start asking your questions, you'll start seeing answers. Now, again, you have to be aware of what's going on because you may see answers and you're just not thinking about them, so you're not making those connections. But this is why I suggest that you get the questions and you separate them out. And then the other part to it is, which I didn't mention before, but hopefully you can now see why I would suggest that you go back every once in a while, take 5 minutes every few days and just go over the questions. Because if your brain is aware that you're constantly looking for the answer for this, you will start coming up with information that when you do sit down to do the assignment or write the paper or whatever, you're going to be in a better uh, mentality, if you will, to write that paper instead of looking at that blank sheet and not having any ideas at all. So what you could do is you could conceivably sit there, have some questions, have some ideas. You might even, if you want to, start another sheet of paper that you put those ideas on as they occur to you. So therefore, when you sit down to do that assignment, you have some thoughts that you can stick on the paper, kind of like a mind map, maybe not have any connections, and then start thinking about how you want to make those connections. Now, this may not necessarily work for you really, really well, but it's probably going to be easier for you to work a paper topic off of this than if you're just sitting there like the day before the papers due and you've got no idea whatsoever. At least some of the questions that you've asked are going to come up with give you some ideas of what you could do for that paper topic. Do you see how I'm working this around? Because what you want your mind to do is start thinking about these things that you're talking about and put it together. Now, hopefully that makes sense. But the other part is when you're similar part is when you're studying, if you're going through, let's just say chapter 2, and you're asking yourself questions and maybe putting them in the margins of the book or making, again, making some notes about chapter 2 questions, and you're thinking about it, and you ask yourself, okay, how does this relate to chapter 3? How does this relate to anything else? How does this relate to my other course? If you start looking at the questions and searching to find the answers to those questions, you're more likely to find them. What most students do is they say, what does this mean? But they sort of toss it out into the middle of nowhere because they get frustrated and they don't actually start looking to find that particular answer. So many times, I know I've had it before. I'm looking at the material and saying, what am I doing with this? What does this have to do with anything? And I'm not asking myself a question at that point, or at least I didn't used to ask myself a question that I meant to answer. So if you ask those questions with the intent to find an answer, you may start seeing things in your reading that connects those dots for you, gives you an answer. Does this begin to make sense? Because as long as you start asking yourself, how do these things relate? How does this relate to anything else? If you're in Management 101, for example, how does this relate to, say, accounting? Can you see these examples that are going to start making these connections for you that you'll begin to start connecting the dots and things are going to start making more sense to you when you start looking for those connections. And the only way you can really start to look for those connections is when you ask yourself questions to force your mind to look for those questions, or to look for the answers, rather. Does this make sense? I know it does when I'm trying to work it if we were, studying and I had some examples in it, but hopefully it does. Um, let me know what you think, and if it didn't make any sense at all, let me know that too, and I'll have to rethink about how I want to do this, and I'll do what I can to make it much more sense. But let me know what you think, and hopefully you'll find this helpful, at least to get you to ask questions on your own to see what you can do with this the next time you have to study. And this the same thing goes if you're learning something new at work. Start asking questions. Get the answers, even if you're getting the answers from other people, but put them down in a separate place so that you don't lose them and have a chance to go back and look at them again. Okay. Hopefully this was helpful, and I'll chat with you later. Bye.